All right, we're back with the third and final Sabre Day presentation hosted by the Clyde Sukeforth chapter. I'm Bruce McClure, the chapter chair, and we always hold our meetings in conjunction with the Gardner-Waterman chapter of Vermont, Dr. Clayton Truder, chair. And let me tell you, you are in for a treat. Buckle up. While most histories of baseball focus on men, the truth is that women were involved in baseball as far back as the 1870s. Some formed high school and college teams, some were umpires or baseball writers, some were semi-pro players on bloomer teams, and some even competed against men's teams. And while many male sports writers mocked them, these pioneering women persisted in playing the sport they loved, and as you will see, some of them earned the respect of a culture that didn't usually welcome female athletes. In this presentation, we will discuss the lives and accomplishments of some of the women who loved baseball, including Amanda Clement, Eloise Young, Lizzie Arlington, Maud Nelson, Lizzie Murphy, and Carrie Kilbourn. Dr. Donna L. Halper has spent 4 decades as a professor of media studies working at several Boston area universities. She joined SABR in 2011, and her research focuses on women and minorities in baseball, the Negro Leagues, and firsts in baseball history. A former radio DJ credited with having discovered the rock band Rush, Dr. Halper reinvented herself and got her PhD at the age of 64. In addition to her research into baseball, she is also a media historian with expertise in the history of broadcasting, has contributed to SABR's Games Project and BioProject, as well as writing several articles for the Baseball Research Journal. Dr. Halper was inducted into the Massachusetts Broadcasters Hall of Fame in 2023. And oh, wait a minute, breaking news. The finalists for the 2025 SABR Analytics Conference Research Awards were announced recently, and one of the 5 in the Historical Baseball Analysis Commentary Award was Dr. Halper's Games Project article on the Birmingham Black Barons 1924 Negro League debut game. April 24th, 1924, Birmingham Black Barons make Negro League National League debut with a win over the Cuban Stars. I'm exhausted. Her article
well, you should be. And should I take the smoke in the background, Molly, as something personal? Because there's some smoke in the background.
She's electing a new pope.
Ah, there you go. I was just going to say, maybe this talk just burns her up.
Right, Donna?
I'll be here all week. Tell your friends. So, but yeah, it's lately it occurs to me what a long, strange trip it's been.
Right.
So let's see if things are actually working, because we always do like it when things actually work. So I'm going to start from here and just go from here. So first of all, thank you so much for being here. What a privilege. I'm delighted. Now, one of the reasons I do this talk and several of the others is there is a concerted effort on the part of some folks to erase certain parts of our history, okay? It's like, well, we're not going to talk about this, we're not going to talk about that. My attitude as a media historian is, if these people were there, if they participated, if they contributed, they deserve to be remembered. So join me as we remember them. So in this very famous picture, I want to first discuss the women who were fans, because one of the biggest stereotypes, and it lasted for more years than it should have, one of the biggest stereotypes was women don't like baseball. The only reason women go to a ball game is if their boyfriend or their husband is playing. And otherwise, they can't even understand the game, poor darlings. It's just too much for them. And for those of you that think that I'm joking, yeah, there really are newspaper articles that actually said that. And yet, we have lots of evidence that women did go to the games, that women were fans, and let's talk about a couple of them. Here we have a very famous picture from 1916, from the 1916 World Series. And you've got Jenny Veronica Murphy McKeever, who is, of course, the wife of Ed McKeever, the owner of the Brooklyn team, back then called the Robins. And she would go to the games no matter what. And she had a dedicated group of friends. You see some of them in this photo, and they all went to the games with her. Now, were they all as passionate about the game as she was? I don't know, but they went all over everywhere with her. Unfortunately, in the custom of the day, we know very little about them. We know their names, but just their last names. There's Mrs. Dalton. There's Mrs. Woods and her son, Johnny. There's Johnny Woods. And then we have Mrs. Cloak and Mrs. Conklin. But like I said, we know for a fact that they all traveled together to see the games. And in this presentation, I want to explore some of the women who not only liked baseball, but participated in it, even when society said they shouldn't. Women who were team owners, umpires, players, baseball writers, and as we can see, and as we will see, loyal fans. Now, one of the things I want to focus on is some of the women who played and agreed, because of the fact that most of the women's teams didn't get to play against high quality competition. Some of them didn't play very well. But the fact remains, some of them really did. And as we will see, the problem was when a woman player really did play well, there weren't a lot of options for her. And we'll get into one particular person who probably could have played in the minor leagues had she decided to. And who knows how far she could have gone. That was Carrie Kilbourn. But in the meantime, let us revisit the women who loved baseball, whether they played it, whether they umpired it, whether they owned it, or whether they just liked to talk about it. Now, one of the things that most people forget, even to this day, we all get together at the ballpark, we all sing, "Take me out to the ball game." But what most people don't realize is there's a forgotten first verse to this 1908 hit. And in that forgotten verse, which was co-written by a guy named Jack Norworth, you see him on here, he wrote the words. And he wrote them for his girlfriend at the time, Nora Bayes. And in the introductory verse, it talks about Katie Casey, or in some versions, Nellie Kelly. But in either case, she's baseball mad. And what does she want from her boyfriend? Does she want a fancy restaurant? Nope. Does she want diamonds and pearls? Nope. What does she want? She wants him to take her out to the ball game. So even in 1908, there was tangible evidence that women were going out to the ball game. In fact, it didn't matter whether you were black or white. America was segregated, but baseball fandom was not. This is a wonderful historical photo that I got from the Kansas City Public Library, and I appreciate the field, which opened on July 8th. In the stands, which are segregated for the minor league games, in the black part of the stands, watching and enjoying and appreciating Monarchs. Now, those games, of course, were not segregated, but the Kansas City Blues, they were, and they got a large number of people showing up, and some of them were women. Now, having a woman baseball fan was considered such a big deal that it made headlines when it happened. Here we have Elsie Tidings. Now, you're going to see some sources that say LCB. It's LCV, and the V stands for Viola. Elsie Tidings was a Washington, D.C. stenographer, and she loved baseball. In fact, she stood in line for 3 hours to get tickets for the 1924 World Series I'll bet you she was delighted because, of course, what happened? She's from Washington, D.C. The Washington Senators go on and win the World Series, 4-3 over the Giants. She couldn't have been happier about it. She later got married. She married a guy named George Reynolds. And in my dreams, I imagine them going to the ball games and living happily ever after. But I was so amused when I saw that picture. It was like, so she stood in line to get tickets. But here again, the myth was women didn't like baseball. And Elsie was like, would you like me to discuss the Senators' lineup? I'll be real happy to do it if you want. But it was a different time. Now, why is this picture here, Donna? Well, because if we're really going to talk about baseball, we first got to talk about clothing. The battle to play sports was also a battle for how to dress. One of the things that kept women from participating in sports was they were expected to wear these really uncomfortable, long, just voluminous outfits where you could hardly move around with, crinolines and corsets. And the women that wanted to play sports were looking for another option. And here we have one of the women who started that option. She was a suffragist. She believed in equal rights and voting rights for women. Her name was Elizabeth Smith Miller. And this is a rare photo of her wearing her bloomer outfit. Now, this is considered very controversial. She has a cousin. Her cousin's name is Elizabeth Cady Stanton, also a suffragist. And their neighbor is a woman named Amelia Bloomer. And between them all, they come up with this incredibly comfortable pair of trousers. And they start promoting that it's healthy and it's liberating and it's so much better for women to wear these rather than wearing all the stuff that women are expected to wear. Bloomers take off. They take off in terms of being promoted in feminist magazines of the time, and more people, more and more women and their male allies start supporting the idea of having women wear something comfortable, something like pants, something like loose-fitting trousers. And so it was that bloomers catch on, and Elizabeth Smith Miller becomes one of the leaders in something called the National Dress Reform Association. But she's ahead of her time. And there's an awful lot of consternation about women dressing this way. But this is where it all began, and it's going to become really popular with female athletics teams who would soon be known as bloomer teams. Now, we know for a true fact that young women played baseball as far back as the 1860s. But here's the problem. In the 1800s, it was still believed that education was bad for women. That if women got educated, they might do something that was outrageous, like not obey their husband, or they might ask for equal rights. The horror of it all. Or worse than that, they might turn into men. Because it was believed that if women played sports, their ovaries would shrivel up and they would become men. I'm not making this up. This was typical of what you could find in medical journals back then, okay? It was believed that if women played sports, they'd stop menstruating and they'd stop being able to conceive. And so women were encouraged to never go to college because studying was supposed to be too strenuous for them. And yet, a merchant and a philanthropist named Matthew Vassar thought that was complete nonsense, okay? And so he started a school, which later came to be known as Vassar. And at Vassar, he encouraged women to participate in athletics. He encouraged them to participate in studying. and he encouraged them to live a healthy life. This is an 1876 photo, very famous photo, of the Vassar College Resolutes, probably the first all-female baseball team. Notice they're wearing skirts. This is going to continue to be a battle. Do you wear bloomers, or do you wear skirts, or do you wear a little bit of both? Eventually, after almost 10 years of playing baseball competitively, they're forced to quit and disband the team because they get so much disapproval from the community, from the society, from the church. They finally quit. Unfortunately, the famous quote that I know you've seen from Albert G. Spalding really reflects where the society was at. Albert Spalding said this in 1911. He had said it before, but he wrote it down. Neither our wives, nor our sisters, nor our daughters, nor our sweethearts may play baseball. Baseball is too strenuous for womankind. It stands for American male vim, vigor, and virility. Okay, then. So this is what the women that wanted to play had to go through. Another thing they had to go through was being erased. We have no pictures of the Dolly Vardens, the first Black female team that we know about. No pictures of them have survived. There is newspaper reporting, but oh, my friends and neighbors, it's cringy, okay? It is so racist, it will just make your teeth hurt, okay? It's just awful. But at least we know they existed. Why were they called the Dolly Vardens, Donna? Well, a Dolly Varden was a style of dress, as I'm sure you know. And I mean literally a dress. It was supposed to be very colorful, very flowery, very flouncy, and Dolly Varden dresses were a big deal in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So it actually made perfect sense for them to call themselves the Dolly Vardens, because it was a brand name that everyone knew. But the reporting tended to focus an awful lot on their dresses and not very much on whether they could play ball. They wanted to play ball. Their captain was Ella Harris. By all accounts, she was pretty good. The few newspaper articles we have, she got some base hits. But by and large, we know very little about the team or about the players. And as I said, the coverage of them was quite dismissive. We know that they were founded by a white guy, a barber named John Lang, who seemed to basically just see them as a novelty and a way to make a few bucks. And I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't credit the illustration here to a guy from the Philadelphia Inquirer. In 2024, they wrote an article about what they did know about the Dolly Vardens, and Steve Madden did the illustration based on the description of the women on that team. But the dismissiveness was very common, as was the patronizing attitude in the press. If you want to read more about that, I wrote an article about the way the teams were covered back then. You can read about it in the Baseball Research Journal in the spring of 2022. Marvels or Menaces, how the press covered the lady baseballists. I wish we had more information about the Dolly Vardens. But God bless them for trying to play. In every city, though, from the late 1800s on, even though society disapproved, women kept wanting to play. Here we have a wonderful picture from Hilewood, Pennsylvania, which is about an hour from Pittsburgh. And they made their own uniforms, okay? They taught themselves how to play the game. And they lasted for about a year and a half. And they didn't get a ton of coverage, but they did get some. They actually seemed like they were pretty good. They won most of the games that they played, and they even played against some of the guys in town. Unfortunately, one of the reasons why the teams didn't have really, really good players is that they weren't expected to play for very long. Once the war was over, they were expected to get married and give up baseball. And that's what most of them did. But there are some people that even years later remembered seeing them. I've found recollections of people that watched them play and thought to themselves, wow, this is kind of cool. I wonder if anything will ever happen as a result of this. Well, one thing that happened was there were a few players who rose to the top no matter what. And one of them was Lizzie Arlington. That, of course, wasn't her real name. Her real name was Elizabeth Stride. Some sources erroneously say Stroud. Nope, birth certificate says Stride. I'll go with the birth certificate. She was born in August 1877. She grew up near Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, and she was basically apprenticed into the game by her father. Father loved the game, and she started going with him, and she got into it. But instead of watching, she decided she wanted to play. Turned out she was pretty good at it. She took the name Lizzie Arlington, and she soon got the attention of the male sports reporters. And when they tried to be dismissive of her, they found that she's a pretty good pitcher. She's getting people out. She's getting guys out. Wow. And pretty soon you start seeing the tone of the articles about her really shift from, "Aw, isn't that cute, a woman trying to be a pitcher," to, "She just struck out the side. She's got a pretty good curveball." And gradually she won people over. Now, in July of 1898, as is well known to anybody in SABR, she became the first female player to play for a minor league team and get paid for doing it. She played against the Allentown Peanuts, which are today the Reading Phillies, I believe. No, that's the other team. She played for the Reading Coal Heavers, which were later the Reading Phillies. My apologies. But no matter how you slice it, she played against the Allentown Peanuts. Now, I'd love to tell you she struck out the side. She almost got shelled. She was really nervous. The guy that brought her in did it as a stunt, and it's pretty well known. But she wanted to make a good impression. Everybody who was anybody was watching her. And the first three hitters got on. 2 hits and a walk. But then she buckled down. She got the next 3 batters, no runs scored, and even the male sports writers had to admit she was pretty good in the clutch. And some of them decided that, yeah, she probably was good enough to play in minor league ball. But after that, nobody would play against her. None of the minor league teams wanted to be defeated by a girl. So she went back to doing the bloomer thing because you got to make a living. Same thing with Maud Nelson. Maud was the other really well-known, really high-profile female player who played on the bloomer teams, but then even was able to get men out. This picture is from about 1906. Maud's real name was Clementina Breda. Some sources say she came from Italy. Some sources say she came from Austria. We don't know a lot about her early years, okay? Her life is quite a mystery. We do know she fell in love with baseball, and by the age of 16, she was playing on bloomer teams, like she was on the Boston Bloomer Girls. And she was, in fact, wearing bloomers, which, as you know, is now more than just a statement of rebellion. It's like, I play a lot better when I don't have to worry about skirts. Like Lizzie, Maud really stood out. She became respected as a pitcher. She had a long career, played mostly for barnstorming teams in the Midwest, 15 years. And she later became a scout. She became a manager. She ended up with like a 4-decade career in various aspects of baseball. Now let's talk about a couple of women who weren't players, but they might have been. Amanda Clement. Amanda's a very interesting story. She was born in South Dakota just before it became a state. It was a territory back then. And she lived right next door to a ballpark. How convenient. Now, everybody in her neighborhood, they all knew her, they all liked her, they all said, hey, why don't you try to play? She did. She was awful at it. She knew it. And what she found was she was pretty good at calling balls and strikes. And so it was that she decided to become an umpire. It was a very smart move on her behalf because not only did she find her calling, she also found something that earned her the opportunity to participate in baseball, even though she wasn't good at playing it. She was in great demand. Okay, now she didn't wear bloomers. She decided that she would wear a skirt, and she did, but nobody cared. Nobody cared what she was wearing. She could have worn a bathing suit. She was one of the most in-demand umpires, male or female. Colleges wanted her. Semi-pro teams wanted her. If there were minor league teams, they would have wanted her too. She originally began umpiring as a student. She made a few bucks doing it. It helped her to work her way through college. She later on was a physical education teacher, but she continued to umpire. And she ultimately became a personal trainer. She gave swimming lessons, but for years, from 1904 to 1912, regularly, and then sporadically after that, she was often called upon to be an umpire, and she was widely known for her fairness and for her accuracy. Now, here is, to my knowledge, the first woman to own a baseball team. This is Helene Hathaway Britton. She owned the St. Louis Cardinals. No one expected her to. Her father and her brother had owned it. When they passed, she got it. But everybody expected her to sell it. She didn't want to sell it. She liked baseball. She decided that she would try to be the team owner and be a positive force. And she decided one of the things she'd do is make the ballpark more user-friendly for women fans. More ladies' days, make the stands a little more comfortable, cut down on the gambling and some of the other stuff, just make it more of a family activity. And she modeled that by bringing her own kids to the ballpark. It's like, see, perfectly safe activity, fun for you, fun for me, fun for Marie and Frank. Why not? She owned the team from 1911 to 1916. She finally did sell it in 1917, but by all accounts, she wildly exceeded everyone's expectations for her as an owner. Now, here's somebody I love talking about. And first, hats off to the relatives of Ida Schnall, who very kindly gave me pictures and helped me to fill out her story. I also wrote her Wikipedia biography. Not all of it, but most of it. Ida is a forgotten hero, okay? Ida's one of the reasons I do these talks. Ida was a champion swimmer. She was skilled at track and field. She won many athletic awards. And she loved baseball. But unlike some of the women fans, she was like, hey, I'm good at sports. Look at all the trophies I've won. And she decided that she would try to play. Now, Ida was born in Austria. Family came to the United States when she was very young. She was raised in the Bronx. And at a time when girls were supposed to only participate in ladylike sports, mostly golfing and tennis, even though that's what you were supposed to be involved in, she was like, nah. And so it was. She decided she was going to be a diver. She was so good at it that she tried out for the 1912 U.S. Olympics team, and she would have made it. Except the head of the Olympics team did not believe women should participate in sports because it was unfeminine, and he wouldn't let her be on the team. Outrageous. She would have made it. She would have been a diving star. As it was, she went on to be a star in a silent movie where she was a diver, and she went on to be a stunt woman and a whole host of other things, but I'm getting ahead of myself. Ida decided that she was going to show everybody, and she never took no for an answer. This is a staged photo, okay? Ida, as it turns out, was good at every sport she tried. You name it, she could play it. And when she played baseball, which she did, she played in bloomers. She was on a bloomer team, except she founded the team. And in this picture, though, this was a special occasion. The female team that she had founded was about to make its debut, and she wanted to make sure it got plenty of attention, and so she posed in a flowery hat and a beautiful dress and heels. Oy, she would never play baseball in heels. Ida knew everyone. She knew Christy Mathewson. She knew Rube Marquardt. You name them, she knew them. And she had the courage, or the chutzpah if you prefer, to go right up to these players when they were, hey, you know, I'm starting a female team and I really want to be good at it. Will you give me some tips? And they did. And they did. She knew everybody who was anybody. And so it was that she founded the New York Female Giants. And they played baseball mostly for charity, but against some men's teams, off and on, throughout 1913. She later went on to that movie career I was telling you about. Went to the West Coast, married, raised a family, but she also started a baseball team out on the West Coast. And she was a baseball fan all the days of her life. And she was also a passionate advocate for women participating in sports. Now, why you got a picture of a high school up there, Donna? Well, I want to talk about Carrie Kilbourn. Carrie was a graduate of New Brunswick High School, where she founded a girls' baseball team. And she taught the other girls how to play. And they started playing around the area. And a funny thing happened. People started noticing that, like, wow, she's a pretty good pitcher. She really is. And this is going to start getting her some attention. Carrie was born in 1894. Her father was a fairly well-to-do mill owner in New Jersey, and her brother played semipro. This is a thread in many people's lives here. Carrie started really getting attention in high school as an athlete, but she also was a musician. She could really play a really good cornet when she had to. She could also sing. Now, here we have some headlines about her. Notice the respect with which some of the writers talk about. She's a real ball player. And they were surprised. People started coming to her games because, like, isn't it cute? Look at the girls playing baseball. It becomes real obvious real quick. She's got a surprisingly good fastball, excellent changeup, and a really good curve. And she's getting people out. Okay, fine, it's girls. But later, some of the boys that play semi-pro in the area start asking her to pitch batting practice. She's that good. And she's getting them out. Pretty soon, she's starting to be in demand. Best woman baseball player in the world, said one of the headlines. And she was. She was one of the best women baseball players, but she was more than just a woman baseball player. Carrie Kilbourn, most accomplished girl baseball player in the country. Everywhere she played, she was getting attention. Everywhere she played, she was getting a following. Pretty soon, people were coming in from other cities to watch her play. Like I said, boys' teams are asking her to pitch for them. And she's doing it. And she's getting people out. In 1911, she is so well known that she is starting to get picked up by the New York the New York newspapers. The New York Times, the New York Daily News, the New York American. People couldn't believe it. And when she's not pitching, she's umpiring, just like Amanda Clement. Now, one of the things I am the most disappointed about, no pictures. I've gone everywhere. I've gone all over New Jersey looking for photos of her. Nothing has survived. But boy, howdy, the articles have survived. And she's beating amateur teams. She's beating semi-pro teams. She's 16 years old. And I'm asking myself, where does someone like that go? Well, one of the things happens to her. She goes to Puerto Rico. She's with an all-star team. She's the only woman on the all-star team. They write about her in Spanish. They write about her everywhere. And she, meanwhile, is advocating for the fact that girls should play baseball. She graduates from high school. She gets semi-pro teams asking her to play. And then her father drops dead. Suddenly, very young, only 47, and she was very close to him. And she's taking care of her mother and her younger siblings. And she never does anything after that with respect to baseball. She still umpires, but she stops playing. And I wish I could have asked her why. But then again, as I've just guessed, where would she have gone? She didn't want to be on a bloomer team. She was good enough to probably be on a male semi-pro team, but in those days, that was unheard of. You weren't going to travel unaccompanied with men. So in the end, she umpired, and then eventually she became a car salesman. She was very good at driving. And then she ran a taxi service. She ran one of the only all-female taxi services. She specialized in women that were shift workers, nurses, women that were coming home late. She's very proud of the fact that she never had an accident. But I've always wondered what would have happened if she had been allowed to continue playing baseball. So let's move along to some of the sports writers. And of course, one of the best known is Eloise Young. Now, this photo was probably taken for a yearbook, and it was intended to convey the message that even though some girls like sports, they can still be feminine. But this is where she felt the most comfortable. She loved horseback riding, she loved football, but the thing she loved the most was baseball. She became a sports writer for the Trinidad, Colorado Chronicle News. Her articles were often syndicated. She covered the 1908 World Series, sat in the press box and held her own with the baseball writers. Every last one of them. They shot questions at her thinking she was somebody's girlfriend. She knew more about it than they did. And she became very respected as a sports writer. She was a sports writer until 1912. She married. She moved down to Denver. She became the official scorer for some of the Denver Grizzlies minor league games. And then she moved to the West Coast. But she was one of the first examples we have of a widely known, widely syndicated, widely quoted female baseball writer. In fact, they made her an honorary member of the Baseball Writers of America. She carried the pin with her wherever she went for all the days of her life. Now, I love Ida McGlone Gibson. I do, okay? I love her. Ida was a gossip columnist, okay? And that is how she spelled her name, with an H. Don't ask me why. Ida McGlone Gibson was a gossip columnist. She was, in her day, one of the most widely syndicated gossip columnists in the United States, okay? She also wrote on the women's page. But you know what else? She liked going to ball games. And one day, one of her editors got the clever idea, hey, how about an article about baseball through a woman's eyes? He figured she didn't know much about it. Just like Ida Schnall. She knew everybody. She knew all the players. She'd talked to them. She'd gotten their autographs. She did a series of interviews in 1912 with Joe Wood, Christy Matheson, Jake Stahl, Jeff Tesreau, John Muggsy McGraw. She did another series in 1916, and she asked the questions the fans would have asked. And then in 1918, she went off to serve her country with the Red Cross. But she was just an amazing example of somebody who wasn't expected to know about baseball, turned out to be a really good baseball writer. Let's talk about two African-American baseball writers. I hope I'm not being boring. Again, here's my problem. No pictures. And I've tried everything I know. Nell Dodson, later Nell Dodson Russell. Since it's Black History Month, a few words about Nell. Nell was the first Black woman to ever be a sports editor at a major publication. She was the sports editor of the Baltimore Afro-American long before the war. This is long before, like, oh, the guys all went off and they needed somebody that, nope. She had been covering sports for her college newspaper since 1935. In fact, she left with only a couple of semesters to go before graduation, much to the consternation of her father. But she left to follow her dream to be a sports writer. And she became the sports editor at the Afro-American, covering the Eli Giants and covering a whole bunch of the other Negro League teams, Homestead Grays, etc. Her writing is just excellent. She then went on to New York, where she wrote not just about sports, but about the pernicious effect of segregation on Black athletes. She wrote about equal pay. She wrote about the fact that Black athletes didn't have access to the best fields. She was just a dynamo. This cartoon, which you kind of can't see, when she was young, she and her father would open up their home. Minneapolis was de facto segregated. She went to the University of Minnesota, and she and her father would open up their home, kind of like a little hostel for visiting parents that wanted to look at the town, and they were dealing with segregation and needed a place to stay, and they stayed at the Dodson house. Just an incredible reporter. And so was Willa B. Harmon. Her real name was Willie, which she was never fond of. Dan Burley, the outstanding sports writer for the Amsterdam News, I love him. He gave her the name Willa, and she was like, thank you, and called herself Willa from then on. She covered the Kansas City Monarchs, and she covered other Negro Leagues teams in the mid-1940s. Just an outstanding sports writer. I am so glad that finally some of her work is being digitized. Willa B. Harmon. And then there's married to Fred Downer, and the married time she was a kid. She grew up in a town where as a woman, she was expecting society stuff, but whenever she could, she volunteered to cover baseball games. Covered them pretty well, too. She covered the East-West All-Star game. She covered a bunch of other games, but she always covered them from the perspective of a gossip columnist. Who's here? Who's sitting with whom? What are they saying? What's their attitude? She made you feel like you were there. Later on, she moved to Chicago, became a writer for the Chicago Defender and the Chicago Bee, and was for a while the circulation manager for the Pittsburgh Courier. Just an incredible sports writer when no one expected her to be. But I close with something I've always felt bad about. And I've always felt bad about this for two reasons. Where Ida McGlone Gibson got cooperation from the teams. Okay, maybe they saw her as a novelty. Maybe their wives read her gossip column, but by all accounts, she was treated pretty well by the teams. Pearl Kroll was not. She was the sports editor for Time magazine, true story, in the late 1930s into the 1940s. She not only wasn't given any respect by the teams, she had to pay her own way into the games that she was being asked to cover. She also they wouldn't let her sit in the press box, which I think is outrageous. A couple of male reporters took her side, but it was the late 30s, early 40s, and she was ahead of her time. No photos of her seem to have survived. Why did you include her gravestone, Donna? I went there, and I promised on her grave that I would continue to tell the stories of the pioneering women who participated in baseball so that people would know that they were there, so that they would know that Pearl was there, that Ina was there, that Ida was there, that so many of these other women who have today been forgotten, Nell Dodson Russell, Willoughby Harmon, they were there. And thanks to their groundbreaking work, we know a little bit more about baseball and a lot more about the fact that the stereotype that women don't care about baseball was false then and is false now. Thank you.
And she bows when she's done. That is fantastic and so appropriate. And
Was I okay? Was I
for
harmless?
for today's times, we, we have so many incredible writers who just so happen to be female in this sport today, those who are emerging, those from the past that you've discussed. Melissa Lutke, who is in our area, who is in our home
But that's
here
my
in
point. We're
London.
standing on their shoulders. We're
Exactly.
standing on their shoulders.
Spot
And
on.
they got us here.
Spot on. Spot on. If you have a question for our presenter, Donna Halper, tonight, go down to the bottom of the screen and hit the react button. You will see another button marked raise hand. Hit that button, raise your hand, and we will get you in line for comments and questions to Donna Halper tonight. First up, Molly McClure. Molly, you're up.
Thank you. Donna, I have a connection to the word bloomers, but it's not with baseball. And I found it really interesting that you talked about bloomer teams because I competitively danced Irish step dancing for 20 years, and the bloomers were a matching set of silk underwear that went over like your Speedo underneath your dress. So the lining and that matched, so they never knew you had like a Speedo under your dress.
Yep.
So I found that really neat. And I have a little piece of girl history also. I was the first girl in my town to walk on to my football team as a starting kicker and a wide receiver, inspired by my great grandma. So she died just before I started high school. And I came home from like orientation. I said, Dad, I need you to sign my blue book. And he wasn't surprised that I came home with a blue book. He figured I was going to sign up for something because I had been active on swim team as a kid, dancing, all of this. And he goes, oh, what are you playing? What are we going to? I said, oh, I walked onto the football team because grandma told me to, and he couldn't argue. And coach tried to make me wear a dress and heels because you have to dress up on the days you have a game away, especially. And I looked at the coach and I'm like, why do they, they're wearing khakis, a dress shirt, and a tie. They're like, well, you don't own a tie. I'm like, my dad's a lawyer. I can get ties. So I was allowed to go with dress pants, one of my dad's suit shirts, and one of my dad's ties.
When I was in radio, I was one of the few women where I worked, and the consultant told the women announcers that they should go by their first name so that they could be like a fantasy for the guys, and that they should always sound sexy. So I was supposed to just be, hi, I'm Donna, and Ew. No offense, I don't mind people sounding sexy, but why just the whole idea just didn't do it for me. So that having been said, yeah, there were during the 1940s, as I'm sure you know, with the whole a league of their own. Yeah, they advised the girl athletes to always wear makeup and all, because that whole dichotomy of
Yeah.
you can't like sports and still be feminine.
Well, I got a good one for you. So I was playing a game. Dad had to sign a special slip saying I wasn't going home on the bus because I was getting my confirmation that day. So Dad came to the game. He had my confirmation dress in the back of our van, with my gown, like my stockings, everything. Everything was in the back of the van, and he got some like wipes or something so I could clean myself up. And Dad waved to me from the side, like, come on, we gotta go. So I just finished that last play, and I go to I'm literally ripping off my gear to give it to my coach because my upper pads didn't fit in the girls' locker room. My upper pads had to be in the boys' locker room. And a boy on the other team goes, oh my God, I just tackled the girl, and I just run by waving.
Karen, you got a hand up.
She does. Karen Holleran, you're up. Go.
Could you tell a little bit about Jackie Mitchell?
I could, but I'll bet you that there are also some other, for obvious reasons, okay? There were a bunch of people I didn't get to. I was running short of time, and I was very mindful of how much time I wanted to take up from you nice folks. I could do a part two, for heaven's sake. There were so many other players that I could talk about. I tried mainly to focus on the really early ones. Because I felt like those were the ones that were the most likely to have been forgotten about.
Okay, that's fine.
We just might take you up on part two, Donna.
I have no problem. I have a part two, but like I said, I was mindful of not wanting to go more than like 50 minutes because I was afraid that if I went on too long, I mean, like I said, Lizzie Murphy, Jackie Mitchell, I've got photos of other players that actually did play and, that were on not just bloomer teams, but semi-pro teams. And so.
One of the things that you mentioned a minute ago that struck me, and my wife will hopefully confirm this. You talked about how you were instructed by, radio producers years ago to sound sexy and use your first name. We obviously have MLB Network on every, cable provider in the country and whatnot. And you are frequently bombarded on that network by, in my opinion, some very knowledgeable and on point women seemingly dressing intentionally sexy maybe I'm out of school, out of line
the
here.
female announcers are always expected to wear sleeveless dresses that are very clingy.
Short, very, very, very high heels.
Yep.
And, I frequently look at the television and say, why? Is that necessary? But
I know.
But
yeah, at some point we will get into the debate about did Jackie Mitchell really strike out Babe Ruth and all that other stuff. But, that really takes away from the person's career because, like I said, for me, Lizzie Arlington wasn't just, well, how many people did she get out in the one inning that she pitched? This was a very long and interesting career. And she was doing it at a time when there just weren't a lot of metrics to judge women players by. I'm amazed that some of these women did as well as they did, because today, after Title IX, you have more organized teams, you have more opportunities to throw and to pitch and to learn different kinds of pitches. Imagine how good Lizzie Arlington and Maud Nelson must have been in an era where they basically just had to learn on the fly, if I'm making any sense, because there was no one, it wasn't like, well, they went to training camp and then they played in the minor leagues for a while. There was nothing. And there was constant disapproval from society. So whether Jackie Mitchell really did that one great stunt or not, by all accounts, she had some talent. And I don't know how we evaluate that talent without the stunt, if I'm making sense, because a lot of times there's a reductionist quality, like we reduce the person to this one thing that they're known for. Whereas as a media historian, my tendency is to want to look at the whole career. And the fact that male sports writers, I wrote about this in the Baseball Research Journal, the fact that male sports writers were saying good things about Lizzie long before she ever played for the Coal Heavers, that says more to me. Because not even knowing if she ever was going to get into a minor league game, these were people that were like, oh yeah, women in sports, they can't even throw overhand. God, you throw like a girl, Nobody accused Lizzie of throwing like a girl. Okay. Nobody accused Maud of it either. So the fact that they won over the sports writers of their day, that says something to me. Okay. So I'm thinking in that way.
That's fantastic.
If that makes any sense at all.
We're taking you up on part 2.
So I hope I did okay. I mean, I hope I was halfway interesting.
You were fantastic, and you were fantastic. Stop that right now. I'm shaking my finger at you.
No, I'm very serious. It's a different audience every time, so you never know. Okay? You never know.
True. Comment in the chat. Loved it. Thanks for the opportunity. Another comment in the chat from our resident comedian Alex Days. I'm glad John Sterling never dressed sexy.
There it is. There it is.
Although in a previous comment he did say you were badass, so that's cool too.
In my mind, I'm thinking the Yankees win, cha cha cha. The Yankees, cha cha cha. But
all right.
The situation is that it's very important for all of us as historians to put things in context. Okay. So yeah, and I'd like to know who that one voter was.
We all would.
It was Ichiro, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You know what? I would love to see Ichiro do an interview in English. And I know people that covered him, and they say he speaks English better than you and me.
Yes.
But he won't do interviews in English because there's this, I don't know, this fear of like sounding stupid, or we live in such a gotcha culture, okay? You say one thing wrong, everybody's like, aha, Jacques, you know? And there's some people that just don't want to go through it, okay? So, because I was always curious about that. There are several Japanese players that I can name, and you can name them too, who in the clubhouse, their English is just fine. But they won't come out and say a word.
Nope.
Not
very guarded.
So there it is. So anything else I can tell you? Because otherwise I'm going to go grab a hot chocolate.
I think they're exhausted. I know I am after Sabre Day. That's 3 meetings on a Saturday. It's been a day.
I wasn't, Bruce. I wasn't trying to, do the humble brag thing. This audience is different from the average audience that I speak in front of, where it's like people who aren't necessarily expert. They aren't necessarily anything other than casual fans. So I have to build that talk differently from how I build a talk for people who are like, we live and breathe this stuff. So I just wanted to make sure I was giving you stuff you hadn't already heard 3,000 times.
Well, when Bill Nolan says it was excellent and packed with detail, it was excellent and packed with detail. So there you go. Now we have a scheduled day off tomorrow. Thank goodness. I take a break, rest up, and we're going to have another big one Monday night at 7 p.m. Eastern as we continue our regular programming.
I got one question while we're all still here.
Go.
You were recording.
Yes.
One of Ida Schnall's relatives was traveling and couldn't be here and asked me, will the tape be available? Because I am profoundly grateful for the cooperation I got from that family.
I will
wouldn't
make
have those photos. Okay.
it'll
If
be
it
on
weren't for the
YouTube
family.
tomorrow.
Okay.
All right. So tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, we'll have Don Slavic here to give his SABR 52 presentation. That should be Monday night at 7 o'clock. A hit model from the Major League Baseball 2023 season. Are the things they call ground balls still outs? The sign-up links are in the chapter meeting booklet distributed each Monday and also available on the SABR events calendar at sabr.org/events. If you would like to be added to the automatic participants list, get your login details each week without having to sign up. Email me today at bruce@brucemcclurenh.com. And finally, if you're a baseball fan watching on YouTube and you like what you see, please like this video and subscribe to our channel to be alerted to each of our weekly uploads. And if you're not yet a member, you need to join the Society for American Baseball Research, the premier baseball community, offering an amazing baseball buffet of options to explore your fandom. SABR boasts more than 35 different research communities, over 80 regional chapters, and innumerable opportunities to connect with baseball minds across the world, just like Donna Halper. For more information, go to sabr.org/join today. Dr. Donna Halper, you're awesome.
You ain't so bad either.
Hey,
And
thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me. And for those watching on YouTube, much love. Thank you for being here. Join SABR. We're a nice bunch.
There you go. And with that, let's get everybody out of here. We'll see you Monday night. Have a good night, everybody.